The Legend of the Kai, The Grove, by StoryMan-Jack. I sat on the bench, my pack with a few clothes and my laptop sitting next to me, and waited on my new guardian. My argument that I was 16 and didn't need anyone to take care of me since I'd been working for almost a year was ignored by the courts, my school counselor, and just about everyone who I could get to listen to me for more than 5 minutes. The gravel, rough and dimpled, pushed around like larger bits of sand between my feet, the only place I would allow my eyes to see, though my mind was 1,000 miles away. A smoking cigar butt landed between my feet, getting my attention. "You Jimmy?" a rough, older voice asked. "James," I told him absently. Something about my name caused people to want to change it. It's even easier to say if you think about it. James, Jimmy. There are even fewer syllables. When I stood, I found a much younger man standing behind the bench than I had expected, looking more 35 than 55 like I was told. With gray coming in on his temples and his short scraggly beard, he stood eyeing me, squinting into the sun under his smashed cowboy hat. The beginnings of wrinkles that I could imagine someday becoming deep, craggy crevices lined areas on the man's face. But that face was hard and it was worn, a face that had seen its own loss, its own disappointments, its own regrets. The long-sleeved blue button-up shirt was well worn, and the off-color straw hat, perhaps white once, burnished crinkled upon his head. This man had worked for a living. His hands were rough and hard, just like his cowboy boots that were somewhat broken down in the heel, most likely just work boots. One of his legs was strange, looked smaller than the other, wrong somehow. It did explain why he had a walking stick, about 3.5 feet of some hardwood polished to a shine, a large knob on the end where he would hold it, and it leaned on the bench. He pulled a pack of cigars out of his front pocket and lit one, puffed on it for a moment to bring it to life, his cold blue eyes never leaving my face. They were Swisher Sweets of all things. Hell, I hadn't known anyone actually smoke those things instead of cutting them open to use them as vehicles for different kinds of smoking. Pulling the smoking cigar from his face, the man nodded toward an old, rusty Ford truck, perhaps once blue. "Well, James," he smirked, "there's your chariot. You get in the old beast and we'll have us a little talk on the ride and figure out our situations." I turned and nodded. "What do I call you?" The man grunted. "Cowboy." He walked toward the truck at a slow but measured pace, dragging his right leg as if it were of little to no use. "Everyone calls me Cowboy." He puffed on his cigar as he used the stick in his good leg to pull the useless appendage along as if he'd always had to do so. We got into the faded old Ford pickup, and I had to note that the vinyl-covered bench seat was comfortable, if not new. But before pulling out of the drive, the man looked over at me, catching me again with his blue eyes. "I'd have come up there for you, got you on a plane and all that, but hell, I figured you needed some time to yourself." And then it struck me all at once, and all I could do was nod. That long trip from Chicago to Dallas gave me time alone, but not without people around me, on trips of their own, for reasons of their own. It felt to me like I was in a group without being in the group. The presence of all those people's stories at once comforted me and, I'll admit, entertained me. I imagined why each of them had been on that bus, the lowly trek to the southern desert from the bright, shining metropolis of Chicago. And I felt after imagining all those tales that we were in something together. If there were an accident or another tragic event, we were in it together. Even if the world began its end, as I'd wished it might do so when I had gotten on that bus, we'd all be there together, bound by the journey we had undertaken. I've been pissed that I had to ride a bus at first, but had to admit that the time alone, reasoning through my emotions, was something I would have even understood before I'd taken the trip. I nodded toward the leg. "What happened to you?" I asked. "Well, you don't know much about me, and that's expected. Your dad was pretty pissed at me the last time we spoke." He paused as something just came in his mind. "I need you to tell me your full name, James." "What, you don't know it?" I asked. The man shook his head and turned the key off, killing the truck and turning to me. "Not from your own lips, boy." He shook his head. "There's a kind of power in that, your name from your own lips. It kind of proves something to me. I know your name, boy, but you need to speak it to me. Voice it." "James Angus Doyle," I told him almost sarcastically, not really understanding why it was so important. The man's face went blank for a moment, as if far away. And then, as he came back to himself, he sneered before starting the truck, looking into traffic, and then pulling back out into the flow of it to leave the bus station. "I always thought that was ugly, boy. James is formal enough. They had to go and saddle you with a peasant name like Angus. Of all the shit they could have chosen, it should have been something like Corn or Fionn." His accent in pronouncing the mythical heroes of old Ireland's names showed that he was true East Texas stuff. "It's what they named me." I looked over at the man who was chewing on his cigar, navigating the twists and spirals of Dallas traffic. "Said it was a family name." That brought a snort from Cowboy. "Well, that it wasn't. Bad enough our ancestors named, well, never mind. Look for a new one. I'll sign off on anything you want." He paused for a moment and smiled. "What about Seamus? I always liked Seamus." "You mean like that kid in Harry Potter?" I asked. "No thanks." The man's face fell. "Yeah, I kind of see what you mean, but the boy in the book was better than the one in the movie." He watched the road for a moment. "What about Sheehan?" the old man muttered. "Yeah, that's a good, solid Irish name there. Sheehan." "That's a character in a book I just read," I pointed out. "Well, shit, boy, looks like you're just stuck with Jimmy. Plain old Jimmy. Just don't ever go by Angus." He laughed, taking his cigar out of his mouth and pointing the end of it moist and heavily chewed. "James," I told him. "Why was it so hard for people to get?" Cowboy screwed up his face for a moment, as if almost angry, then chuckled and shook his head. "I do got a few questions for you, and then maybe a story. Kind of a history lesson, if you will." "About?" "Look, I'm just a 16-year-old kid. I'm going to have a lot. It's not like I'm going to have a lot of answers to things," I told him. Hell, I didn't even have a girlfriend. My best friend had moved a few months before the fire, sent off to military school for getting in trouble with me. "No, questions about who you think your family is, why you're here," Cowboy said, watching the road. "I'm here because someone killed my parents. I know both Mom and Dad were from old families in Ireland, but they never said much beyond that. But they left for some reason." I shrugged. "I looked up a lot of stuff about old Ireland and their myths. I thought it was cool. A lot of things contradict each other. Different stories and figures from myths contradicting whatever virtues one story says with what they have in another, stuff like that. And then it gets confusing since some of the Celts on the British island idolize similar or even the same deities from the Irish one. It's very confusing. Why did you say that, boy? That your parents were murdered on me? The man just watched the road, his face as unreadable as stone. I thought the police decided they died by accidental fire. Smoke inhalation and that. In their beds? I asked, my voice harsh, my face hot. In the middle of the day, while I was at school? The old man just nodded, his face still pointed to the road, expression never changing. Yeah, I agree, not at work, not in meetings. Wasn't like them, he agreed. Why? He left one hand on the steering wheel, but lifted the other for me to wait. Listen, I know and I trust you, but this is related to history. And I need to tell you a story about kind of the beginnings of your family, really. Both sides, one almost as old as the other. The old man put his other hand on the steering wheel and gunned the truck, jerking over 2 lanes as he went across the highway. The blares of horns and squeals of brakes broke through the sound of the air conditioning and the rumble of the old engine. I looked up to watch as Cowboy held up his hand, bird flying, to all the folks he had just cut off, who continued to blare their horns. I could see their mouths gaping and yawning in their curses as we flew on by. Aren't you worried someone out is about to shoot at you? I asked. He seemed surprised by the question. Why would I be worried about that? Well, I've heard stories about Texas. Doesn't everyone have a gun? I asked. He looked guiltily down to the dashboard, underneath which I saw a gun in a holster attached underneath. Well, pretty much everybody is. I mean, carrying. He pointed back out at the other motorist. But they are 100% sure that a rude motherfucker like me will definitely have one and be willing to use it. He grinned. So no one will get too damned uppity. And it relieves the hell out of the anxiety of these damn city drives caused me. Why the hell had my parents left me in the care of a madman? I wondered. It really seemed like a significant question to me, if you really think about it. But you were the one who cut him off, I pointed out. He nodded. Well, what did you see, boy? What should I have done differently? Taking all the information you have now. And tell me what I could have done better, he asked, taking an exit to another freeway. I thought about it, looking at the situation like a puzzle. Well, you could have slowed down and eased your way over with your blinker. And I would have missed the exit. He motioned at the window. Those pricks back there wouldn't have let this old bucket over. Hell, if I was in their shoes, probably neither would I. With a top speed of about 60, they'd be afraid they'd get stuck behind this old jalopy or something. He chuckled as if it were a joke. They're all so very busy, so very late. For what? I asked. He shrugged. Anything, everything, nothing really. Nothing important anyway. No, from their perspective, those things were probably the most important things in all the world at this moment. It'll be something else in 10 minutes. So aren't we in a hurry? I raised my eyebrows. We could have gotten off at a later exit and come back. Cowboy raised his finger. That's true, but there would be a cost, see? A cost for my civility is my time and patience. Not to mention the extra grass of going down the road, turning around, coming back, trying to get back on the highway. It's just too much to go out of our way. And I don't believe I was willing to pay that much price. At least not if all I was going to receive in return was a little ambivalence. Everything you see, boy, has a cost. Every action and decision. And you really need to be sure you're willing to pay that cost of those. Try to understand the consequences before you make an all-important or even an unimportant decision. He paused as if considering. Watch an interview with that Elon Musk dude, he explained. He considers his answer for almost everything at almost uncomfortable lengths of time before he answers. If he even decides to answer. True, I have to admit, but isn't that sometimes a ploy to put people off? Oh, I'm sure it's that too. Super smart folks use things every way they can. They're like that though. Considering everything before they speak or decide something, and consider the ramifications of what they say most times. And even when it seems that they didn't, oh, they did. He paused. The cost for me was just too high. And damn it, I'm hungry, and we left the stew going before we get back to the cabin, he said. Who else lives out there with you? I mean, where we're going? He looked confused. Just me. Then he paused, glancing over at me. And you now, I guess. Then who is watching the stew? I asked, confused. What the feck is wrong with you, kid? You think I got a wood stove? Or perhaps a fire over a hearth and a fireplace? Or maybe just a shack with a pile of sticks in the center and a stone floor for a pit? The old man laughed. It's in a crock pot, you a jackass. On medium. Oh, I said, grinning. I guess when they told me you lived in a cabin in the middle of the woods, I trailed off embarrassed. The cowboy laughed. You figured it was the Hatfields and McCoys or Swiss Family Robinson out there? Something like that, I responded. I haven't got internet. Jackass kids. All right, then, let's talk about the story. He began shaking his head. Well, history lesson, really. Now, you're going to have to understand a couple of things. Yeah, what's that? I asked. First, Cowboy held up a finger, still watching the road. A lot of this is oral history, and you won't find it written down anywhere. In the old days, only bards knew the entire sets of stories, he snorted, in Gaelic. That's why there's so many contradictions to the old ways, for one. And the Tuatha De Danann never were considered gods, not by the Irish people and not by themselves, he explained. The other, I asked. That I'm leaving shit out because it's told in Gaelic normally and you don't understand that yet, he said. Yet, I asked. But the man in his hat ignored me while he looked for a place to start. Just like I realized it sidetracked me away from what happened to his leg. And I'm leaving shit out just because you don't need to know it right now. But depending on your choices, you'll learn sometime. Or not. But that's another conversation for later. He noted, watching the road. I nodded, okay. He grunted and began. Just the basics here. A long time ago, a group of people, several tribes in fact, left an area in the mountains near the eastern side of Europe. No one knows why they migrated, but they did. Perhaps there was a slide or something that forced them out of their mountain valley. But that's unimportant because that's not really their true origin. But that'll be later. You're not ready yet. These tribes grew smaller and smaller over generations because they were leaving bits of themselves along their course on their way west. Families and members settled in the world along the way. When they finally found the Green Isle, they were but one tribe of men. They had family on the other British Isles, but their main group landed on the Old Clover. Cowboy's eyes were distant as he watched the road. They found already on the Isle of People, and those people called themselves the Dainu. They taught and loved and mated with the Gaelic tribe, and over time formed the core of the Irish peoples. Conn was born from them, and even as he defeated the Fomorian invaders, he was betrayed by them. and by his own children, the children of the Danu, the Tuatha-Dé. So an order was formed. From the teachings the tribe brought with them, but also with mysteries from the Danu, that the order was the Druid order. I snorted. Now you're getting into that Middle Earth kind of stuff, I said. Kid, where do you think that Middle Earth kind of stuff was inspired from? The old man snorted. But yeah, I get it. You've grown up in a world of technology and movies and computers and social media. But you'll get used to it all once you get your hand in the dirt and understand Gaia's call. Needless to say, your father came from a family that could trace its roots back to Khan himself. And your mothers are said to have been older, from the original Danu and Gaelic tribes, maybe even Fionn himself. But they left Ireland, I said. He nodded. They wanted to live away from all that, wanted you to grow up in a modern world, a world of opportunity not linked to the old ways. They left for love, really. I can't blame either of them, not after all this time. Were they wrong? I asked, to judge his reaction more than to know the answer. Nah, he shook his head. Not at all, kid, though I'm afraid I didn't always see it that way, he grimaced. But regrets are all done now, he said. You'll understand later. He looked over at me. Seemed to be saying that a lot, too. Sorry, but you have to see to believe. It's not something you just come to. Why don't you go ahead and get a nap? It's a couple hours out to the home place. He nodded at the console stuck between us on the bench seat. It was an aftermarket thing, almost taped down. I lifted the lid to find the travel neck pillow in its hollow. Thanks, I said, and pretended to try to get a nap, leaning up against the window and frame. But unfortunately for me, sleep took me anyway. I knew I was having nightmares, but when I woke, I couldn't remember them. I heard a driver's door slam, and it startled me awake. It was mid-afternoon when I saw the old cabin, the sunlight only making it to the floor beneath the trees in fitted stilted rays on the ground in front of the truck. It wasn't anything like I would have imagined. It was long and tall with 2 stories, built like a lodge into the side of a rocky hill, or small mountain of stone, really. The upper floor was most of the bedrooms, it looked. The upper floor is most of the bedrooms. Each has its own restroom, Cowboy explained, gesturing up. There are 5 of them. You'll be staying on the biggest one on the north end. I'm staying in the only bedroom on the ground floor. He held up his abnormally skinny leg by his pants leg, having to heave his whole body back as he did so, with his right arm gripping a pole on the walkway just outside the driveway. On account of my leg, I got out my little bag and laptop. Cowboy nodded at the computer. I'll see about increasing our data package. We can get up to a gigabit. Unlimited. I didn't use that much, so it didn't make sense for me to pay all that money for it. Feckin' highway robbery, how much they want to pay me to pay out here. When not 100 miles down the road in town, they get it for 40. It's crazy. He out of the bag, held my 6-month-old gaming computer. I guess that's done. Gotta pay the big bucks, I guess. You got that, monster? I shook my head. Not in any hurry, I told him. I hadn't even looked at my phone since I'd arrived at the bus station. The social worker making sure I had the correct bus. All the condolence texts, the posts, and the cyber fake sympathy. I didn't need any of that baggage. I didn't want or need any of it. I could deal with all my emotions another way. But it had to be something constructive, something real, maybe something they'd have been proud of. I turned my thoughts back away from my parents. Night would leave me time to think about them. When I lay there and couldn't sleep, Cowboy just nodded as if he knew what I was thinking. What do you want to do for a living when you grow up? He asked me. I shrugged. What do you do? He looked at me and laughed. Not a damn enough. He paused and turned up to the path. Come on, let's get some food. We'll talk a bit more. I watched him drag his leg behind him as he pulled his body along. The drive had entered a portion of the woods that was as if it were sculpted out of the forest and the mountainside. The circular driveway that cut and led down a slight grade into the forest to a courtyard before a 2-story cabin, lodge really, and a small mountain it was built into. The ferns and other plants lined the pathways, and fencing, wrought iron, ran along the house, and the plants looked wild in nature, but in a way that was obviously professionally tended, as each one were intended to be there. God's a gardener, you know, Cowboy said. Come on, kid. You'll get used to it soon enough. Hell, you'll be helping me take care of that shit. Everything inside was as one would have expected in a lodge. All the surfaces were gold and polished wood, lacquered and gleaming in the light. This included floors, walls, and furniture all. The dining table just off the kitchen would have sat a full 10 people and seemed to be one of those great solid pieces of wood, though that was impossible unless it was a sequoia. Cowboy sat 2 steaming bowls of brown stew at the table, one of its corners, and sat down himself. I knew it was silly, but considering everything, I bent my head and said a little prayer, as if speaking not only to that creator that my parents so fervently believed in, but for them, to them, with them perhaps. Nothing would come out through my emotion, so I ended up sitting in silence, a little meditation to my folks. Amen, I said, even as Cowboy joined his voice with mine. Amen, though I wiped tears from my eyes. Nothing left to it. I ate mechanically, my appetite almost gone. The way I see it, boy, you got 2 doors, Cowboy said as he spooned a full spoon of broth into his mouth. I nodded and ate. The first spoon, a carrot, potato, and some sort of green bean floating in a pool of dark broth, entered my mouth. The vegetables were sufficiently done to have it one crisp crunch and then a buttery feel when eaten. It wasn't like that fake Guinness stew that come in the Betty Crocker cookbooks that fake Irish folks like to pawn off. This stuff was made with real whiskey, flavored with Tullamore or something better. Door number 1, Cowboy began, again while I wolfed down the entire bowl of stew, or tried to. I didn't know I was so hungry, and it was the best darn Irish stew outside of my mom's. I froze, spoon held halfway to my mouth. I swallowed the bile trying to raise up from my gut and dropped the spoon in the bowl and pushed both away. The thoughts of my mother curbing my appetite as if for good. Cowboy just nodded as if he knew what had gone through my brain. Well, door number 1 will get you enrolled back in town, in school. I think the bus gets around here like 5:30 in the morning. You might get home around 6:30. Then you'll have chores, normal shit like mowing the lawn, taking out the trash, that kind of shit. Until you're off to college, and then I can brush my hands. I swallowed, not thinking any of that sounded the least bit interesting. Cowboy, you don't have a lawn, I noted. At least not one that I saw. He glared at me. I'll make some shit up like they do in the army then. Have you paint rocks or something. And door number 2? I asked, without malice, I might add. Cowboy looked down into his bowl and sighed. I guess the food can wait. He put the bowls back on the counter in the kitchen next to the crock pot. Better to go out there before nightfall anyway. Have a hell of a time coming back. The crock pot was a flowery thing he must have gotten at Walmart or another fine purveyor of cheap kitchen gadgets. He covered the bowls with plastic wrap, Saran brand, and headed toward the door that led, I presumed, into a mountain. Cowboy turned to me and said, once we get out the cave, follow me close and don't stray off the path. He grimaced. You aren't used to the woods out here, and I don't want to spend all night dragging my damn leg around trying to find your ass. I followed the man through what appeared to be a root cellar, and then out through another wooden door, up some steps, out into the sunshine. The path, what really just looked like a well-used game trail, led us deep into the tall trees and hills of the tail end here in the Ozark Mountains where we were. They encompass parts of Texas, Oklahoma, and Arkansas. Some even said that the secondary plateau reached into Louisiana. I was amazed at how the crippled guy was able to get around in the brush and roots, the fallen limbs and things buried in deep leaves. Generations of clutter Mother Nature had left behind. I kept tripping every other step. Hey, my dad did say something about you once, I told the man. Not that long ago, really. Oh yeah? What the hell did you do to deserve such a threat? Cowboy asked, a chuckle in his voice. Yeah, exactly. I understood what the man was getting at. Dad had used him as a threat. I'd been with some guys who tried to run out of the store with a television, I told him. That right, what happened to you? He asked, picking his way through the woods, not really stopping. I called Dad and he came to the police station to get me. I shrugged, trying to get around some brambles in the trail. He told me that if I ever got caught with Goliaths like that, doing that kind of thing again, I wouldn't have to worry about going to military school like my buddy Scott. But he'd send me to you, cowboy. I stopped to see if the man was watching me. But he wasn't. He moved slowly and steady, dragging his leg, smile upon his face. Yeah, he said that if I did that, it would be like going to a preparatory school, a military school, prison, all rolled up into a back-breaking slog through a miserable existence I'd beg for somebody to shoot me from. I finished. Yeah? Huh. Must have been pretty bad what you did. Why didn't he send you? Because I was the one who called the cops, I told him. Seems like you are your pa's dead kid. Well, yeah, that's pretty much explains door number 2. Except he was being kind of sugarcoating it. It's a little bit harder than all that. Instead of military, think SEAL training. Now, keep that firmly in mind when we get down there, Cowboy said. Keep what firmly in mind? Well, your daddy said about sending you to me. How hard it'd be. But you do not have to say yes. Keep that firmly in mind. And think about your decision. Until you say yes, that old door number 1, almost 100% of folks end up taking, is still open to you. And honestly, he paused, his slow trek locking eyes with mine. It's far worse than your papa described. You don't have to choose door number 2, Cowboy almost implored. Well, that sounds ominous, I said, not entirely understanding what the man was getting at, really. He chuckled. And there you go, throwing out big words and all that, and make yourself sound educated. Let me tell you something. You're about to get an education. Either way, say yes or no, you're going to have your hands in the dirt, boy. And then we broke through some undergrowth, and I saw why he waited until I could see it. It was a grove of trees so unlike the others anywhere around it that it appeared alien. Marking its entrance was an old, tall, gnarled thing with other trees up and around it. It's splitting a stream of some kind with falls around it. Small mushrooms and lichen covered the tree, and what appeared to be fruit that glowed in its branches hung down. It was like the old fairy stories my mom had told me when I was a child. It was a grove with trees so tall and large that no light made its way through their boughs. Giant things that almost stretched my mind, not to mention my imagination, to behold. The smallest of them would have been 60 feet tall, if an inch, and there were others that were larger than even a sequoia. And they were oaks, elms, maples, other deciduous and evergreen trees, some I'd never even seen before. Not that at 16 I was any expert. There were what were obviously mushrooms mixed in among the trees, yet the mushrooms also large. So large, in fact, they could have been hollowed out in order for a family of 5 to live in. What is it? I asked, feeling a warmth, a soothing coming from the massive trees, as if they held a consciousness within them. Is something long past its time, Cowboy said, and sat down on a stump next to the path. There were several, as if they'd been placed there on purpose, for just such the purpose. Alright, now it's time to tell you a bit more of the story now that you see the old trees, the grove. A little of what I held back anyway. Yeah, seemed like this was missing, I told him. Like, if a bard had written it, there should have been magic and romance and all that other stuff, wouldn't there? Well, yeah, but I'm not a bard. Listen, back before those peoples left Eastern Europe, they came from somewhere else. Well, they came from underground, but somewhere else too, Cowboy said, taking his hat off to rub his forehead. I was surprised to see that he had a full head of thick, dark hair, just the temples graying. I'd fully expected a bald pate up on top. Yeah, but at least been funny. You about to go all ancient aliens on me, old man? I laughed at him. No, he chuckled. Not alien, but ancient. More than you know. Now listen. Let's start with something familiar. A long time ago there was a flood. A great flood, the Cowboy said, as if he were choosing his words very carefully. Yeah, I told him, like Noah in the Bible and stuff, and Gilgamesh and a bunch of other ancient stories. Most have a flood myth. Happened around at the end of the ancient Dryad. I watched Joe Rogan. I know what you're talking about. I'd done a paper on it in 6th grade too, after all. So between Joe Rogan and that, I was a fucking expert. Or at least I thought so. Well, before that event, there was a very different world thriving on this here rock. One as advanced technological as this one, if not even further ahead, Cowboy tried to explain. Then why is there no evidence, I asked, having had the very same argument online with a Reddit poster. I mean, you had me with shared flood mythos and things, but a technological world just wiped completely away? I can't buy that. just stones and carvings in the ground, and a few old underground ruins. That's all that's left of technology as great as ours? The cowboy grunted. What if I told you that all that technology they even had portals, could portal from one end of the earth to the other? That was biologically based, he said. What if I told you that no evidence of it remained because they used biological animals and plants and sea life to do their bidding instead of machines? Their aeroplanes were birds bred to do such a thing. Their lighters were little lizards that, if squeezed, spat fire. All of these things we can do and more, done with full cooperation and concert with Earth, with Gaia. The stones and markings upon strange places like South America and others are the bones of that biological matter, sort of their structure. He looked hard at me. When the cataclysm hit, there were whole species of animals and plants that were vaporized, and zero evidence of even their bones would remain. Nothing. There's few cave drawings, but people mistake those for modern day animals. Actually, they represent things that no longer exist, even in the fossil record. He paused, another long pause as he looked out in the late afternoon glow that surrounded the grove. But their technology only worked with Gaia's help, he finished. I looked up in his own cold blue eyes. So like unicorns and griffins and dragons and things, they were vaporized, left behind? He nodded, but then held up his hand and waved it back and forth. Sorta. They're still dragons. There's just things that just don't exist anymore. Well, then why would their descendants on Earth turn to metals and fire instead of their biological stuff? Surely they kept records of everything. I asked, since any survivors would continue to know what the work of their Earth was, theoretically, because Gaia stopped answering their call. They had to work in concert with her, you see, her power. The flood was caused by, he stopped as I answered for him, a collision of a meteor or something like that near the ice cap, causing flash boiling of unbelievable amounts of ice and water, causing a great instant flood and rains because the sky was full of moisture for days and days on end. I explained the theory. It was a comet, one which also held ice that melted into the atmosphere. The cowboy said, the world was a much drier place before that flood, and it wounded Gaia. So that left our ancestors with only their ki to rely on. Like Kung Fu movies, Chi, the power within, right? The man smiled. No, ki. Though I'm sure it's based on the same thing. Ki is the energy given off as your human body goes through its natural process of converting food and fat into energy. The power given off by that electrochemical process produces the electrical pulses that run your heart, your brain, hell, your entire machine. The pathways that run along the paths of those biological processes, those reactions, they give off emissions, power, that if you could see it, are pathways in the human body. That is your ki. One can use their ki to do many things if trained properly, but the main use of the ki is to connect oneself with the power of Gaia and through her to the Kai. I sighed. Well, then the obvious question is, he smirked, what is the Kai? Then he put his hat back on his head and looked around and spread his arms to include everything. The Kai is the power of creation. What was released when their Big Bang happened, when God said, let there be light. It's what connects us, binds us to reality in the universe. together. It's what connects you and me and that tree, you and that stone. I looked at him and laughed. All right, you got me. I couldn't hold it in. You're just describing the force, you old fart. You put me on? Cowboy stood and looked wrong. I did not, he growled. And be careful, you don't want us to get sued by the rat. I shook my head. He settled back down, chuckling. It's kind of like the force, except there's no light side or dark side, just different ways of accessing it. And it expresses ways in different forms. Our ancestors used the Kai, as you would electricity, and its connection and such to her in order to do the things that modern man uses technology for. To grow ships out of beasts, airplanes out of birds, gliders out of lizards. Communications and the like across the world was used by Kai. Wizards, witches, and other slingers of magic are actually ones with the genetic makeup to allow them to connect their ki to the Kai. However, they must use something else to filter the power. They don't have access to Gaia like a druid. Wizards use their emotions, though most die very young, and the smart ones are frugal, only using their talents to gain worldly power and wealth, though it tends to cause them to go insane. And then they use that influence that they buy for their own personal desires, whatever that may be. I looked at him. So you're saying like George Soros is an evil wizard? I asked, chuckling. The old man shrugged. Who knows? There's other ways to touch the Kai, ways through shadow, the dark. And what's it's about to happen is, well, I can't instruct you on this choice you're going to make because it's unprecedented. You may be offered more than one choice, and probably will, since she's in there to talk to you. Why? I asked, his grim demeanor warning me of some reason. What's so unusual about? I shook my head. This was all out of a weird science fiction novel or fantasy one. What is different about me? I finished lamely, not really understanding what he was talking about. Kid, because she wants to talk to you inside the grove, he said. Oh, who is she? Nothing bad. It's never been done before, not this way, not this early. Wait. So this Kai thing, you're saying it's like the Force? In a way, he glared at me. So are there Sith, bad guys? And I'll be told about them before, I'm not supposed to know, or it was only a half-retarded attempt at snark. He glared at me again. There are good and bad people, not in the Kai. And if you let it alone guide you, terrible things may happen. It has no morality. Those who call themselves Shadow Wraith just connect to it differently. But some believe it's unnatural. It isn't evil in and of itself, it's just the darkness. Just like it's just the light. They like to work toward one another, he explained. Oh, like they seek balance. I understood. Yeah, kid, looks like your old dad did teach you a few theories, even if you didn't know what he was doing. Cowboy nodded. It shouldn't be that easy for you to get. It's pretty damn complicated shit. Not really, I'm joking. You should have got it right off. I sneered at him. What now? We go in the grove. This, son, is the last grove. And we chat with a few folks in there. Gaia. Well, we go in the grove. This is the last grove. And you gotta understand that. We chat with her and perhaps a few more folks. And see if you'll be allowed to learn under me. he said. You must understand what this grove is first, though. And what's that? I asked, having no idea what he was getting at. It's a nexus in the Kai, a place where all points and all realities meet, the last of its kind, he said sadly. He paused, you'll learn much more about it another time. Needless to say, it's a gateway of sorts, a place of safety and seclusion for the Druids alone, a last and last resort of the communications they had and used before the cataclysm, before Atlantis was lost. Well, if the Kai is the powers of creation of God, I asked, then why connect to the earth through Gaia? If you were to try to touch your key to the raw river of Kai, then you'd burn out in an instant, boy. Gaia is a filter, serving the will of the Creator as she always has, through her service to humanity. You mean door number 2 is to be your Padawan? I asked, shaking my head. The man snorted. Apprentice mean you have an obligation to do as your master tells you without question, without thought. Any defiance is instantly and harshly punished. You're a reflection on the one who instructs you and their legacy. For most in these arts, only train one in their entire lifetime, regardless of the stories you've heard. So strict? I asked. Beyond that, boy, this is life and death. You hold the power to break worlds. You should say no. And this is your last warning. He stopped talking for a moment and shook his head, snorting at Dacus. And stop talking about that damn movie. I swear, you're determined to get us a copyright issue. And he drug himself and his useless leg down the path toward the grove, leaning on his... Wait a minute. Would you call it a walking stick if he was Irish? Wouldn't it be a shillelagh? I thought about it as I followed in after him. Up along the path, around the old gnarled tree that stood before the gateway in the little stream, the trees gave way to a small paddock, light shining down in the center of what appeared to be the grove. It looked like an amphitheater made out of those giant mushrooms, next to a large pond with what looked like a natural fountain. Everything was manicured as if sculpted out of a fantasy tale. In the amphitheater center, upon a bench, much like the one, almost exactly like the one I'd waited on at the bus station that morning, was a beautiful woman in a sundress, sitting, enjoying the beauty of the scene before her. Cowboy stopped before the bench just as I caught up with him. The young woman smiled, her beauty so appealing that I felt my heart skip a beat. Her face was unblemished, but with perfect proportion, not too much roundness and just enough cheekbone, full but not swollen lips. Almond-shaped eyes that were almost not quite Asian, glowing green as if reflections of the sun were prismed through my own emerald orbs. Her ivory skin was unblemished even by a freckle, and was framed by long, luscious, curled and ruby locks, almost stripper red, and matched her eyebrows. She smiled up at me, and it was like light coming in from the darkness, something I needed to feel, something that had been gone, and I did not know since my parents' deaths. Like the sun had always been dimmed in my eyes until now. Please sit. Her voice was deep and sultry, and I felt it whispered within, a wisdom and an age that was unfathomable. She patted either side of her. You too, Druid. she told Cowboy. He grunted and sat. The others waiting around the corner, he looked around. The woman winced at the leg as he pulled it over into place by his pants leg so he could sit comfortably. Why will you not allow me to heal that? She asked it in disgust. Cowboy shook his head. No, I got it going against your wishes. I shouldn't have been in there, and I shouldn't have gotten involved. So I keep it in remembrance to remind me. I didn't know if I should respect the man or call him an idiot. But if someone were willing to heal my disability, it must have been an important thing to remember. I asked, trying not to stare at the beautiful woman's shapely legs or her ample cleavage, and I surely didn't want to meet her deep, glowing eyes, as if I knew that she'd be thinking she could see my teenage thoughts. Mainly hormones, really. You know they will say he is too old. You are aware of that, man. She said as if I weren't there at all. He grunted. Yeah, they will. I tried to interrupt, holding up a finger this time. So, he is your chosen, the one who will carry on. Even more than you thought of his father, it seems. She asked again as if I weren't there. Cowboy nodded, his hands resting, thumb crossed at the wrist upon the pommel of his walking stick, leaning slightly forward. Also, trying not to look at the woman that could have graced any magazine cover she wanted. From Vogue to Playboy, she would have been it. Then leave us, Druid, she said. I asked as Cowboy pushed on the stick, bringing himself to his feet. The fucking Druid was just going to leave me here with America's Next Top Model. Come back just before dusk, she told the man as he turned. God damn it, what's going on? I demanded, standing up. Cowboy and the woman stood to meet my gaze for gaze. Ice blue eyes along with glowing emerald ones sizzling into mine as if I'd just broken some unknown etiquette protocol. It was quite an experience, like your father and a potential wife had teamed up at you at once. Wait, why did I use that word, wife? I'm going crazy. I had little experience with the former and none at all with even the imaginings of the latter. Kid, this is an avatar. She'll explain, and I promise you can trust her. Just remember her ways are old ways. Her morals are her own. She is not human. Cowboy said. He scratched his head beneath the old dusty straw hat, causing it to bob up and down in the afternoon sunlight. She's gonna make you an offer. Sort of kind of like the offer that was made to myself and your old dad. Though he didn't follow through on his end, on his. He nodded toward the woman who stood right next to me. And even though I thought she'd been shorter, like if she stood she'd be 5'5" or so, seemed to tower over me. And each of these offers, kid, are a little different. And you can always say no up until you say yes. Understand? The woman snorted. He took his eyes off mine and looked into her emerald eyes. His father paid his price for his failure, for his breaking of his pledge. I ask you not to exact one on his seat. And why did he break his deal, I asked, already feeling I knew the answer. In these kinds of stories, it was always two things, greed or love, and knowing my folks, it had to have been love. My parents helped people, even when they shouldn't have, even to the point of being taken advantage of. And you could never find one without the other, always snuggling and cuddling and laughing. A tear ran down my face. And the woman laughed and smiled. No offense was given. Oh, I was angry. You see, young man, your mother had wiles that none, not even she knew she had. Not for Joseph. And he was smitten, the woman said with a giggle, since they were children. That is an old pain, and is nothing more to me than a memory that has left a scar in its wake, Druid. Her eyes seemed to pulse into mine. And if he is what you claim, well, he has nothing to fear from me. Leave and we shall see. Calvert was gone by the time I came to my senses, sitting next to Gaia again on the park bench. Each of us turned so that we could face one another, our eyes locked with mine. Who are you? I asked. She smiled. Look into my eyes, young Irishman, and tell me what you see. For a moment, I lost myself in the swirl of those impossibly green irises. And indeed, they seemed to glow and flash from gold and green, and possibly like one of those stickers that changed depending on the angle of the light they hit it. And yet, they swirled at the same time. I do not understand how they did it, but they did. I hesitated before I began to speak what suddenly became clear to me. You are the polar ice caps. You are the mountains, and I mean all the mountains. You're the swamp and decay of the forest floor. You're the dry and dusty arid domains. You're the ash and lava and the destruction of the deep seas and boiling creation. You are the trees and the fields and the wings and the fins, and you are the rock upon what we build and from which we pull our bounty. You are Gaia, the earth. I was shaken. There was power in what I'd said, and I did not know how I knew that either. Just another geek who'd been addicted to video games and on the verge of being addicted to porn as well. But I heard that power in my own voice. I am Gaia, she said and sat, motioning for me to scoot closer, her yellow sundress remaining perfect as she moved about. First, you must understand what your modern world has forgotten. She began without preamble, unless this was her preamble. I didn't know I was really struck down here. I was just this dumb nerd kid, 16, and this was an avatar of the Earth herself. And I had to think I should feel ashamed for my lack of goodwill, recycling, Earth Day. My mom was lost. I was just dumbstruck. It's a thing. Struck dumb. She sighed. It isn't as bad as you think. Whatever effect the human race has on their environment, their climate, their waste is mitigated a great deal by the technologies they have invented along the way just to deal with those issues. Look at the burgeoning wind and solar process of nuclear plants. In time, these things will be great boons. You have no need to feel guilty about the way things are viewed. Oil is contained deep underground in my flesh for man's use. Trees are grown to build homes and to filter your carbon from the air. This is done purposefully. Plant more trees. The cycle of climate and seasons generally shift and change. That is the way of all life, from time beginning. Even so, I said, blushing. She held up a hand. That too is not bad. the advocates and all those spewing climate change things, fool. Even if they're doing it to put it in their own pocket, it still brings awareness, at least. And that's all the human race really means. The earth was placed here for humanity, for them to thrive. Think nothing of it. Yet I would suggest being a good steward of the earth is never a bad thing. She smiled. I nodded like an imbecile. Her face grew serious, and I sighed when she spoke. Now, speaking of cycles, did you know that your technological civilization is not the first one on the earth that reached the stars? That's what Cowboy told me. I nodded, looking at the nature around us. Well, Atlantis wasn't the first either. You do realize how long it has been since the Creator placed the earth here at the Great Nexus. Suddenly a thought struck me. What is to come has come before, I quoted. And what has come will come again, she finished, smiling. It was a comet? I asked. Gaia shrugged. Or your event could be your society, with its great wars and proxy wars and West society versus everyone else and everyone else versus each other mentality. A technological destruction in lieu of a natural phenomenon. The cycle will be preserved anyway. It's all part of his plan. Whose plan, I asked. Why, the Creator's, of course. You do know there's a plan. I shook my head. I never understood that part of it. And I just stared at her. She laughed, a peal of music that curled down my whole body. I forget. You have little understanding of, well, you are older than most. Let us begin at the beginning. I sat back and waited. You, no matter what your current science says, she sniffed at the idea of science. Oh, it would tell you humanity is not an animal that evolved alongside other animals and just happened to be the only animal to develop self-awareness over time. Self-awareness is not an accident. It is a gift from your Creator. So, evolution is, I began wrapping my mind around what she was telling me. Then creation is, evolution is a theory, as is creationism. Neither one proven, neither one 100% correct, she explained. Evolution of the mind, of concepts, of real science and engineering and mathematics are examples of inherent human basic makeup. Unlike any other creation in reality, you learn and grow, and you're cognizant. That awareness allows emotion and the soul, that piece, the Creator himself, of himself, that resides within all sentient life. That's what gives beauty to every single human soul. Art, music, beauty, innovation, that is of the soul, young seeker. That is what is distinct and individual. That is humanity's gift. Then Christianity got it right, I joked. She shrugged, in a way, as did Buddhism, Islam, Hinduism, Judaism, and hundreds of others. You see, human religion, much like science, is there to express the innate knowledge that a piece of the Creator does reside within themselves. Their religions were there to explain that. And their religions, much like their sciences, evolved out of necessity and lifestyles inherent in the truly unique situation each region where they grew and developed required them to be. Islam is very militaristic, for in their lands, tribes had to fight over water and other natural resources. Men adapt their spirituality as well as their mental capacity and their physical bodies. It is quite extraordinary and unique to all life on earth. And earth is a nexus, I asked. Let us use a metaphor from the Christian Bible, which you are most familiar with. How do you know that? I can read your thoughts, young man. I am Gaia. She smiled as if she hadn't had this much fun talking in eons. Literally. You, as a human being, are the smallest part of the body of the Creator, which, like Christians' way of thinking, that each member is a part of the body of the church. She continued, think of a being created out of pinpoints of light instead of cells. There are an infinite number of these pinpoints of light, and each one is a different reality. Each reality has life, and humans and other self-aware creations. Just think about that. An infinite number of universes, realities, multiple universes in one. Infinite. And that makes up the body of the Creator. As I did what she asked, my mind seemed to expand again. The second time in a day. Understanding something I didn't know I craved to understand, but had thirsted for. And you are its point of nexus, where all these realities meet, our world, I asked, overwhelmed. The human mind was not created to understand the infinite or the omnipotence, she admonished. A few have come close to the infinite, like Einstein and Hawking, but none will ever understand the omnipotence, since you can't sense other dimensions. Huh? I asked, trying to get my head around the pinpoints of light being cells thing way back when. She waited for me. The cycle is turning, young man. There is another reset coming. Human, child of Khan and Fionn. Do you wish the responsibility of holding the knowledge of the Druids and of the Kai to give to the next civilization, the one that comes after? How long do I have? I asked, the weight of the request not really something I could fathom on top of the other revelations. And what about Cowboy? Cowboy's time has been long, and he is weary. He has carried the knowledge for vast reaches of time, and has paid a harsh price for that time. Her voice was gentle and understanding. He will teach you what he knows, but another will teach you what she knows. I was about to agree. I could be a makeshift Jedi druid thingy. What kid wouldn't jump at the chance, right? When she held up a hand, a puff of smoke and shadow coalesced in her hand. A sharp, almost obsidian black feather appeared there, faint wisps of smoky shadow dissipating slowly around it. The druid and the Tuatha will teach you the path to the Kai through me, but you will need more in your arsenal from what is to come, if you choose. But her face grew far off. Consider. Her statement and the feather brought a sudden thought into my hands. What if the cycle breaks and there's not a cataclysm, I asked, hoping to prevent it. Her shoulders slumped and she shrugged. Armageddon. The statement was delivered with sorrow and gravity. The forces from outside all reality will break through here at the Nexus and devour the body of the Creator. She almost whispered as I felt chill. And will spread throughout creation like a cancer, I said. War in every reality. She nodded. without end. And then she held up the feather again. And it didn't really seem so much black as like it seemed to eat the late afternoon light. If you accept connection to me and become the Druid's last apprentice, you must follow his instructions without fail, and you must apprentice to another, one who will show you how to connect to the kind through the shadows. Evil? I asked. She shook her head. Darkness is not always evil. Predators, even those of the night, have their place, and life is a cycle. The only true evil comes from the outside, from the fire, from the void. I took the feather, and it puffed into shadows and smoke again, but coalesced before me in a cloud, and then slowly entered my chest. The avatar of Gaia smiled. One who will instruct you will come to you in your dreams. Look for her. I nodded. How do I commit to this druid thing? I asked, unsure of what to do. And the most beautiful woman in the world, wait a minute, the most beautiful woman that was the world, reached for me and took my face in her hands. It started with a kiss, one unlike the lame smooches I'd had with my only girlfriend, but a deep and passionate thing. Her grip was hungry and wanton, and before I knew it, I'd done the nasty with the avatar of the earth herself, losing my virginity to a literal goddess of the earth. I had just managed to get my clothes back on when Cowboy came shuffling up, pulling his damn leg. They'll be coming now, he said, nodding at the light. It no longer matters, she said. They will train him. They have no choice, and allow you to do so, as well as others. You must remember, this young man will be the last druid's apprentice, but he'll be the first of something new, Gaia said, straightening her dress. Cowboy looked over at me and whistled. The old way? You did it the old way? Really? Just tell them he was too strong to bind himself any other way. They always want demonstration. You know that. And our man here will blow the socks off. I guarantee it. And then she grabbed my wrists, holding them up. My right hand had tattoos, Celtic knots, that ran from just under my fingernails up to combined at the middle of the back of my hand, and another knot, and then to my wrist, wrapped around my wrist, and it looked as if it wanted to go further. They were like the avatar's eyes, fading from green to gold, depending on how it shifted in the light. My left hand had similar markings. No, not similar, the same. Celtic knot design from the bottoms of my fingernails to the center of my hand and ringing my wrist. But they were red and black, fading from one to the other in the fading afternoon light. Cowboy was startled. He already had the ability? He asked. She smiled. His father's gift, no doubt. He sometimes could see bits of premonition. Cowboy shook his head and looked at me. You can never bond another person, not a wife, not a covenant of any other sort, as long as you're bound to Gaia. And if you break that, it's a price, he informed me. Your virtue is your price. You're mated to Earth. That's one of the costs I told you about. You should have asked more questions, boy. I sat and gathered my thoughts. You could have said something. I began looking up to find the woman who I'd just been, intimate, to say the least, with. But she was gone. And it's the best you'll ever have anyway, so don't worry about it. Oh, you can have sex and kids and all that shit. You just can't get married. You can't have a binding spiritual contract already. It prevents it. I thought about it. Marriage can be annulled and you can get a divorce, I said. Cowboy's shaking his head. Only on paper, boy. When you marry in a ceremony and vows and obligations, you're stuck, glued together in your soul, spiritually until death. And God don't die, boy. At least you better hope not. Shit, was all I could say. I waited, Cowboy saying nothing for long moments, when a deep, booming voice made me stand. Druid! 3 stood before me, a man and 2 women. They all wore what looked like ancient Irish-style garb. The man was barrel-chested, wore a topknot like a Viking, and his beard thick and red. The woman on his left was blonde, battle-hardened, and wore beautiful golden armor. But she was beautiful in a hard sort of way. The third was a woman of such dark beauty that she rivaled Gaia herself. Her dark hair and slight frame held only coldness in her deep blue eyes. The man spoke again. He was too old, Druid. You knew this. Cowboy winked. I only ask that he be tested. The blonde chuckled. You think it will change anything? Druid, the boy is too old. His mind is full, not malleable enough to understand. I insist he be tested, damn it, and slammed his wooden staff into the stone, and it cracked. Kneel in the grass, boy, and place your hands into its depths, the booming voice ordered. I did as he asked, though I knelt down so that I was on both hands and knees. It just felt right. Close your eyes and reach within yourself. Find that pulsing power. There. Your key. And use it to reach out. Follow it down into the grass, to its roots, to the soil, into the earth. And tell us, show us what you see, if you wish to be Druid. I closed my eyes and reached with something I didn't know I had. I felt in my right hand the grass, its scratchy surface against my palm and wrist, the blades flowing down over the tattooed backs of my hands. I then felt the moisture, the green chlorophyll that pulsed through its own process of bioelectrical reactions, and followed those still deeper into the pool of the minerals and the sustenance the grass had gained from the soil, and so on, deeper. I felt each individual grain of sand mixed with carbon and detritus and soil into the stone, deep down, deep, and I felt it. I felt the torrent of energy they spoke of. I felt the Kai, like a round bar of power the size of the Mississippi River, the Amazon, the Nile all combined, and it roared in my ears. I looked up, and encased in green power, I was covered in electricity that ran up and down my arms and body. I stood without request from the godlings before me, and I reached up into the darkening gloom of oncoming night, and in the shadows rewarded me with its own path to the Kai, and my left hand connected with a bolt of raw, black power that shot down from the cloudless, starry sky. My green gold tattoos glowed on my right hand and wrist, while the black and red ones did likewise in my other. I felt like a whole caravan of horses was trampling over me, and it was all I could do to hold on to the power. Yet, and without warning, without notice, it was gone, and I fell back to my knees, catching my breath. Long silence stretched, and Cowboy broke it with a chuckle. Sorry, Dagda, Bria, Morgan. Gaia overrode your dumbasses. Why do you insist on using this pose, Druid? The blonde asked, disgusted. 'cause I fit in like this here. Return in a week, child, the booming voice said before I could look up, and we will begin our part of your training. I just knelt there not knowing what to do. Angus, this is the one, the chosen one you told us of. Are you sure? Cowboy just grunted. Yeah. I bet my fucking soul on it, ain't I? Wait. I corrected. Your name's Angus too? Why are you giving me... Wait. I was named after you? See what I mean? Stupid name. You should change it. Anyway, what they mean is you're dismissed, Jimmy boy. James, I corrected automatically. And then I felt myself on the ground, my face burning from the slap. Even before I was aware, I was getting up, and Cowboy was in my face. Though his face was stony, it wasn't angry. The words in a whisper, as if he didn't want the godlings to hear. I'm your master boy. More a god to you than these petty godlings standing behind me. You do what I feckin' say when I feckin' say it, without question or coercion. If I want to call you a scum, you feckin' answer to it. So Jimmy boy, you get your scrawny little ass back to that cabin and get some food in your starving guts, and then get in bed. Just come 5 a.m. It is early, and I'm gonna beat your ass with this thing if I have to ask you twice more to get out of the sack. You hear me? He held up his shillelagh and shook it at me. This is real life, not a feckin' game, boy. What you learn and how you learn it will save or doom people. Ain't no teacher, and I ain't no feckin' guidance counselor. I'm your feckin' master. I am God. And if you win, you live. If you don't win, you feckin' die. And there ain't any no goddamn participation trophies. That's what your mommy and daddy got. A participation trophy. Because that's all you get is buried in the ground. White, foamy spittle formed and flew out of his mouth as he roared at me. Something that looked like he'd held back a long time. I just nodded in shock. Never before having been slapped, much less ordered and violently punished. I decided not to let my natural instinct of return violence come over me, because he was right. I'd agreed. Had sex and everything to seal the deal. Just like a marriage, a contract. It shouldn't have even occurred to me to lash out, to be honest. I apologize, I said, understanding. I'm tired. More tired than I think I've ever been before. I was, in fact, close to losing consciousness. That power that ran through me just had pulled everything from me, and I didn't even do anything with it. Go, he urged, not angry at all. I'll be right behind you. So I did, but just before I left, I heard the Morgan say, "He's a cute one, Angus." Never you mind, damn it, Morgan. You're the god of death. Come on. I hope you've enjoyed this story. I spent a lot of time on it. It is overly long. Please tell me what you think. Tell me what you like, what you don't like, where it's going. You think the passion's there. Anything you want to, even if you think that it's going to hurt my feelings, but it won't. I'm used to it. But as always, I like to say, your life is your story. Make it a great one. Have a good evening. Night.